Hey everyone, welcome back to the We Talk Politics podcast. As always, we are your hosts, Corey Tanisoff and Gerald Mendoza, and it has been a busy few weeks, hasn't it, Gerald?
Yeah, you could say that. It's definitely been a lot. I'll leave it as a lot for right now.
Well, we have no shortage of stuff to talk about, so I guess let's address just the elephants in the room here. Is we had attempted presidential assassination. We had a sitting president withdraw from their current incumbent race, and new vice presidents for nominees. And then there's a whole lot else that we can shake out here. So, where do you want to start here, Gerald?
I want to take it back if we can. Let's start with. We're probably going to focus on one candidate and then the other, or one side of the election spectrum and then the other. Let's start with President Trump and his side of the election right now. And I want to go all the way back to the first televised presidential debate, which, by the way, was hosted and run by CNN because the RNC this year somehow decided to go against the Commission on Presidential Debates, which was a not-for-profit, independently run organization that only ever did public access presidential debates. And so since they no longer wanted to work with them for whatever reason, CNN offered both candidates, both of their campaigns, a chance to do a debate live in studio on the air. No crowd again. It was held in CNN studios. And honestly, from the get-go, the performance done by current President Biden was disastrously bad in terms of just his ability to even just have cognitive sentences put together. There are a lot of jokes and a lot of political satire being put towards his inability to string together sentences and his own confusion, but it seems very, very evident that he was struggling during that night. And President Trump benefited greatly from it. Because President Trump, say what you want about him, he's sharp on them at the moment. He knows how to come up with the right thing to say. He rested a lot in his personal record when he was president. Now, President Trump, being who he is never going to shy away from what his personal opinions are on certain things, whether it be the adjectives that he used to describe himself or anything of that nature. But he came out on top that night, and he was riding a high, I'll be honest. Coming into what was a couple Saturdays ago, June the 13th, he was having one of his rallies, outdoor rallies in Butler, Pennsylvania. And at some point during the rally, which apparently, based on the timeline that's publicly available, he was not very far into his own rally, which usually lasts pretty long and usually it kind of go off script here and there in his own nature. But he wasn't too far into his own rally when there was a sudden, a bullet flew through his ear. There was an assassination attempt on the president. And I'm sure you've seen the video. He goes to the ground, taking cover. The Secret Service then tries to cover him with their own bodies first. And then they get him to stand up. And in the middle of him standing up and trying to escort him out, he pumps up his fist. He tries to rile up the crowd again. He literally shouts, "Fight, fight, fight," when still people didn't know where the shooter was, where the bullets were coming from. And in general, it's just a very chaotic, distressing scene. Unfortunately, the end result of that was not only that the president got injured, but there was also a man who lost his life in another area of the crowd off to the side of the president where the public access stands were. They escort him away. He's treated for his wounds. He is, at this moment, we were told at that moment, about an hour after it occurred, it said he was fine. From what we see so far, this was a complete in total failure by the Secret Service in terms of their security detail, what their plans were, what their preparations were for this event, trying to protect the former president. And remember, if you're a high-ranking political individual or government individual in this country, you do get Secret Service protection because there are people who are out to get you, either people from foreign threats or people that are domestic threats, like we saw with this shooter that tried to take President Trump out. And the Secret Service has a very, very, very important job. And at this moment, they really did utterly fail at that. And weren't able to completely...
The best way you could put it is, they screwed the pooch on it. And
honestly.
I mean, as you're saying, so... I suppose, fortunately for all of us, we will get to the hearings that have recently happened with the Secret Service director and try to get down to the bottom of it, although it doesn't really have a resolution. But in this time, I mean, after the assassination attempt, it seemed like he was just up the next day.
I guess somehow this did really embolden the president and his voter base, who for the last, I'll say, but during this entire re-election campaign, since President Biden won the presidency, he has seemed to ride off of the idea that it's how do I put it? He seems to ride off of the idea and get emboldened by feeling like he's being attacked by whoever, whether it be someone on the opposite side of the political spectrum, someone within his own party that he no longer rubs shoulders with very well anymore. But somehow, if he's saying, "Look, I'm being attacked by so-and-so," usually it riles up his voter base very quickly and very strongly. And this was no different, I don't think.
I agree with you 100%. I mean, you have to think of former President Trump's entire idea of his campaign was, I'm being attacked by the Democrats. I'm being attacked from the inside Republicans. I'm here to start something anew. And so you have to think that it's going to light a match under him when something like this happens. And he and his supporters can only see this as green light go. By all means, this is all more of a reason that he should stay in this race and keep going.
Yeah, absolutely. And then this just so happened to be the weekend before the Republican National Convention, which, by the way, up until this point, he had not had his vice president pick confirmed yet, at least not publicly. It wasn't made public. There were rumors, there were different ideas, different candidates, or different people that he was considering. Ben Carson was one of the names that was thrown out there. I forget who else. I don't remember who else some of the other vice presidential choices were for him. But he ended up settling on Senator J.D. Vance of Ohio. He announced that the first night of the Republican National Convention. And then J.D. Vance then accepted the vice presidential nomination on the ticket the third night of the convention on Wednesday night. And then Thursday night was the president. The culmination of the convention is always the candidate accepting the official nomination from the party. And he did. They usually give their own speech. And I'll be honest, I had the whole thing running in the background while I was doing something, but that thing did last 2 hours of straight speech. Credit to him, because that's not something I can do.
Well, and I will say about his selection is it's very indicative of the campaign that Donald Trump is trying to run here. We have a senator from Ohio who was just put into office back in 2023. So he's kind of a rookie. I don't think he's more than 38 years old. He might be that.
He's 39, I think.
Mm-hmm. And above and beyond, from the second that J.D. Vance started his political run for election, he had established himself as a Donald Trump Make America Great Again Republican, which is vastly different from what we saw him choose with Mike Pence back in 2016.
Yeah, and I mentioned this earlier. Mike Pence was a choice to appease the people who said, "Oh, he had no political experience. He has no executive branch experience. He doesn't know the inner workings of government leadership and stuff like that." So he chose someone like Mike Pence, who at the time seemed like the right guy for that candidacy. And I guess based on the results of the election, it was. Um, but with J.D. Vance, this is now someone who I would say more ideologically will line up with Donald Trump with a lot less question. Um, Vice President Pence definitely they had a bit of an acrimonious split at the end of the presidency with Donald Trump, and so the idea was that he wasn't going to choose him again, and that's exactly what happened. But J.D. Vance seems to be someone who he seems to spark a lot of connection with a lot of people. His book that was made into a movie was very, very popular about his life story. Hillbilly Elegy, I think, is the title. He seems to have a very eventful upbringing, and it does resonate. That type of upbringing does resonate with a lot of people, which I think is going to be a very crucial connection to make with voters going into the election. Having someone in leadership who has dealt with certain types of hardships and can say, I understand where you're coming from, and I want to be able to help you from here, knowing that I've been where you are. That's a very hard thing for someone like Donald Trump to say convincingly. I'm not saying it's impossible convincingly, but for someone like J.D. Vance, who has grown up with a mother and father who were at best absent in his life, and at worst heavily involved in different vices and drugs and things like that, and made his upbringing hard. Yeah, that's going to make an impact in someone who's thinking about, well, who do I want being part of the leadership of this country? Someone who's going to understand what I go through, or someone who doesn't. That could make or break a lot of different states, a lot of different decisions.
And I agree wholeheartedly with that. I think it's an interesting decision by him. I think that a lot of people suspected he would pick somebody a little more towards the middle of Republican, towards centrist. However, J.D. Vance has a interesting track record. I mean, you have to think about who he's going to appeal to. There's two things that really stick out to me. One, he's a Marine. That's going to stick out to a very significant portion of the population. And the second part is that he's young. And when he was put in this vice presidency spot during the Republican National Convention, we were under the assumption it would be Donald Trump versus Joe Biden, and whoever Donald Trump selects as his vice president versus Kamala Harris. Given the fact that both Joe Biden and Donald Trump are in their advanced age, it leaves a little bit to be desired for their backup in case anything happens. Kamala Harris being the backup, she's, not been exactly a map awareness kind of person these last 3.5 years. We haven't heard much, but I think it was a tactical decision of him to pick somebody who's younger, ensuring that the ticket that they vote for will have a president for quite a while.
Yeah. Well, we spoke about that 4 years ago, and I do want to bring it up because we're also going to talk about.
We did.
We spoke about it 4 years ago, talking about how when Joe Biden, we had an announcement saying, because there was questions about who Joe Biden was going to pick as his vice presidential running mate. It could have been Kamala was one of the people under consideration, but so was our personal favorite, who we still think could make a major role in future. Yep, Val Demings, I think was personally, I think was, in nothing against Vice President Harris, but I think Val Demings had a lot of different flavor to her as a political figure that would have appeased a lot more, like you said, centrist voting.
Yep. Had a cleaner track record when you look at their history.
Yeah, and former police chief in Orlando.
I mean, that's going to get you about the same ground. Well, if anything, it'll get you around the same way you're going to get with Harris, Vice President Harris on this one. But either way, it was somebody more involved.
Yeah, exactly. But we talked about, okay, well, once the decision was made, we're like, okay, well, that's the decision he made. Whether we like it or like it or not is a completely different, set of criteria for us personally. But that was his decision, and the decision was with the understanding. You and me had said there was an incredibly high likelihood that this was going to be a one-term presidency for Joe Biden. Now, the way it worked out that this is going to be this is where we eventually got to, is different than what we expected.
Yeah, a little bit.
But this is a one-term president apparently now. So and so this vice presidential pick back in 2020, the summer of 2020, was consequential enough so that we talk about this heir apparent type of figure next up in line in the party. And I'm not going to sit here and deny that a lot of Democratic voters didn't think that that was a possibility as well. I think a lot of them did not expect it, but did understand the probability of something like that happening, where President Biden was already how old when he got inaugurated? Was he 78 or
thereabouts?
Yeah, and so he was going to be 82, and well, the age caught up to him. I don't know.
What we're facing right here is also, I think, so whether or not you vote in primaries, if you're a third party, independent, Republican, Democrat, whatever, what it came down to is it felt like a betrayal. If you look at the Democrat vote in Florida, they just shut it down. They didn't even do it. So the current president was shoehorned in, and it's going to be very interesting to see how the mass base thinks about and responds to Harris being there, as you said, heiress apparent, because there's not a whole lot we've seen objectively in the last 3.5 years from the vice president. I don't know if I've heard an address.
There were a few.
But I will say is my absolute favorite president is one that I don't know anything about. So I'm a little biased here.
To an extent, yeah. To an extent, you still want someone who has enough noise around them that you can understand their capability. I'll say that much. And if there is noise, you want it to be, at the very least, positive more than negative.
Sure.
If we want to go back to the start of the timeline again and flip the coin, back to the debate and how poorly President Biden did, he immediately started receiving calls from different people, and or people making public calls for him to step down from the race.
Well, if I could on the debate, I mean, it's unfortunately at the time that it happened, it appeared as if, I think exit polls came out of 66% of people said that the former President Trump had won the race. And had won the race by 66% coming off of it. That being said, it's not necessarily an age discrepancy. I mean, I believe that Joe Biden was born in 42 and Trump was born in 46. But it's a shame for me to say is our president of the United States got dog walked.
We don't want to think of it this way, but it is what it is. It was a performance that he failed at. You and I have been performers in some capacity at some point. Even if it's anybody who's ever been a performer of any kind understands what it means to bomb a performance.
Yeah, musician, actor,
what have you.
Business leader.
There you go. You have a marketing strategy presentation you have to do, and you can't. Like it fell on its face. You fell on your face.
You bombed.
Exactly. It's just that's what happened, and that's exactly what happened. But it just happened to be the president of the United States trying to argue against the person who's trying to take his position now through our process of election for the office. And so the immediate response from a lot of people saying, we knew a lot of people saying, I guess either the quiet thought started getting back out, saying we knew he was too old for this. We know he's not going to be able to perform under the pressure. He's not going to be able to get another 4 years. We can't afford the possible uncertainty of not knowing if he's going to be up for the job or not. That was all swirling around, and that's what a lot of people started doing. A lot of politicians, prominent Democrats, try to stay neutral on it, try to say we still support him through everything. We still want the best for the country.
The Speaker of the House coming out and privately calling for them to resign.
It was a lot. There was a lot going on. I'm sure there's even more behind the scenes because the way politics works, there's always more going on behind the scenes that we probably won't know about for years until someone writes a book. But it just kept on. The noise didn't seem to die down like other noises in politics do. It didn't move on to the next subject matter. It kept on staying on that subject matter and got louder and louder. Now get to the presidential, the rally in Pennsylvania with President Trump, and President Biden did make an address trying to say, there's no place in this country for political violence, but also try to shoehorn different moments from the previous administration where that type of attitude was more lax in being regarded to or something like that. It wasn't the type of unifying rallying call that you would expect at that serious of a moment. It still felt not overly politicized, but still somewhat politicized in the wrong time. And it just didn't go over too well with a lot of different people. It didn't win over anyone who didn't agree with the president. I know that much. And the people who did agree with the president kind of had to show face and say, well, he's doing the best he can. It ended up being a lot for him. And then President Biden did say, he said, I would stay in the race because he was facing this question time and time and time again. And he said, I would stay in the race. I'm going to stay in the race so long as I'm physically able to do so. The next day he gets diagnosed with COVID-19.
Well, it seemed to be at the time that as soon as the debate had finished, he had announced that he had some sort of illness going on.
Right.
And that had led to increased questions of what's going to happen here. Then we run into the other timeline of the additional calls to step down, and like the DNC wanted more people. They wanted somebody different, and we still don't know who. But then that leads into the attempted assassination on former President Trump.
Right.
In which case, I believe, and this is a subjective opinion, I believe that the majority of the Democratic National Convention thought we need to do something here and now after this. Because this is a rally call to anybody who's ever thought of voting for Donald Trump. And in that exchange, we didn't really get anything as voters. As soon as it had happened, then we got Biden being diagnosed with COVID, current President Joe Biden. And there wasn't much to hear about it. I mean, for quite a bit, we haven't heard, and then we do hear. And we have Joseph Biden speaking at one of Kamala's rallies beforehand. And then our current president drops out of the race. Gerald.
Yeah, it seems to be one big thing after the other, and that seems to be what is the new normal pattern for our political happenings these days. But this is what a lot of people thought was going to happen anyway. They thought it was just a matter of time. They were surprised it took as long as it did for the president to decide that he was no longer going to be seeking a re-election. In the same letter that he wrote, because he wrote a Twitter post and also wrote a letter that he posted on Twitter. In the statement, he says, I'm going to do the best I can to finish, I'm paraphrasing, I'm going to do the best I can to finish out these last months as the president of the United States. And then, I'm going to he endorsed his vice president, which if I'm being honest, you feel like he kind of had to do. I don't think it would have gone, I don't think the party would have been better off in any way, shape, or form if he deliberately didn't endorse Vice President Harris, or if he endorsed someone else. Some of the other potential Democratic leadership candidates, like you've mentioned Gavin Newsom. I've thought about Representative Katie Porter. There's definitely other ones. There's other Democratic governors in different parts of the country that could also, or senators or representatives that can take up that mantle, I think. A lot of people would have thought House Majority Leader Jeffries was a potential pick, but him picking the vice president seemed like like the culmination of what we thought was going to happen 4 years ago. Anyway, like I said, different path than what we expected, but I felt like it was almost necessary for it to be Vice President Harris for there to have any positive impact on the party itself. Now, people putting money where their mouth is seem to have a positive idea of Vice President Harris, at least over the alternative, which was trying to continue with President Biden. And they have seemed to have collected a good number of what they call the small money donations. So not these PACs or super fund corporations or anything like that, but people who actually are likely voters under a certain amount of money that they have then donated, the total being, I think, around 80 million over the last 3 days, maybe more, in support of Vice President Harris's campaign to now be not just a Democratic nominee, but also the what they're hoping for is the next president of the United States.
Well, what you're going to run into there, though, is when it comes down to, you already mentioned, the DNC has enough power that the votes that already fed in don't necessarily mean much. And we still have eyes open whether or not Vice President Harris gets the nomination for presidency. I believe personally that she will. And you mentioned vice presidents that could come up. But I think that that's one of the more pressing issues here. Personally, I think people should vote however they believe. And without knowledge of toward this point, without knowledge of either president or either vice president, we have no idea of knowing what's what. What sense do you make of this, Gerald? Considering we have an assassination attempt on one side and somebody refusing to re-enroll in the election process.
It definitely...
Has anything like this ever happened before?
Not at the same time. Not at the same time, I don't think.
I remember Lyndon Baines. Well, I don't remember, but
you remember from history class learning about.
I remember from history of Lyndon Baines Johnson stepping down and saying that he would not go for a second term.
But you got to remember that was also in March of that year, 1968.
It was not in July. 4 months before election day.
Yeah. And on the other side of it, in terms of presidents who survived assassination attempts, you got to remember who seems to be the biggest draw in comparison for President Trump is
Ronald
Ronald Reagan. And President Reagan, while being president, was shot, and he was shot clean in the abdomen, actually. So they did a pretty serious procedure on him. He did survive, and his approval rating as president went up from 55, 56, which is 1 year post-election seems pretty average, all the way up to 70 plus, 75 plus. It does, I'm not going to say it endears people to you, but it does draw support in understanding that, hey, this is still a human being here who is working. Now, whether you agree with the direction or not is between you and them, but they probably don't deserve to be shot.
I believe in my heart of hearts that the reason why somebody's election odds go up after an assassination attempt would be they're a strong candidate. If somebody wants them underground, if somebody is willing to take them out and they survive, that's a stronger president candidate, or former president. That's a stronger contender than anybody else on the field. So when we're getting down to these tacks, though, let's take a look at the Secret Service and what had just recently happened before we get to the betting odds here, which is our favorite segment.
It is.
So I believe it was July 22nd, Director of the Secret Service, Cheadle, faced the Senate hearing commission on what the heck happened. We don't have any clips to show you, but they are more than freely accessible on YouTube. And It was a absolute pig roast. Just she had it seemed she had no answers, and there were too many things unprepared, too many things that missed opportunities, which inevitably led for her to step down. But I want your thoughts on this, Gerald. If something like this gets a chance to go to a Senate hearing, America's in a lucky spot. But what do you think about the hearing?
Stuff like this is the reason we have hearings to public access. These are our representatives, and the representatives, U.S. representatives in the House and U.S. senators in the Senate. They might be from different locations, but they do represent our country and its collective governing bodies. Those are the moments where they do have to ask the questions that demand to be answered. I think we've gotten so jaded by, like I said, the politicization of so many different aspects of our government. We do still have to remember these incredible tools that we have for our government to use, and this is the moment for it to be used. In terms of the hearing that already happened with the House, I believe it was the Judiciary?
Yeah.
House Judiciary. You don't get many moments where the chairman of the committee, who is of the leading party in the House, which is the Republicans right now, and the ranking member, which is the leader of the opposition party, which is the Democrats right now, are both in unanimous agreement, as well as almost the entirety of the rest of the committee. I don't even think there was any dissension to the idea that this leadership was at an unacceptable level of failing. Now, there's a lot of different details that went into what was going on in this situation, what the preparations were, what was lacking in the preparation for that rally, where the perimeter was, why it was where it was, what the protocols are that are in place as of right now, what the updated ones are that are going to be going into effect moving forward, I'm sure, for everyone involved, not just for President Trump, and now also for J.D. Vance, who I'm positive is going to need his own detail, because the way these presidential campaigns work, they do not go together all the time. They do have to go to different locations. And now the same thing with current President Biden, current Vice President Harris, and whoever the vice presidential nomination is also going to need their security detail. That's a lot of different moving parts. You need to coordinate expertly in a very volatile situation. And there is an understanding that they don't trust the leadership. They at all.
I agree unequivocally. I mean, we saw with the last acting director, they had sent more people, loads more people over to the first lady's. You can't even call it a rally because it wasn't in support of votes, but over to her fundraiser, and they dropped the ball multiple times over on this one. I'm hoping that with new leadership, we can protect Vice President Harris and everybody who comes along with the party, because as much as they would like to deny the fact, this is an open election. Right now, there's no just chalk it away winner like there was in 2012.
Right.
So we're going to have to look for other alternatives. And when it comes down to that, if you want more information on the hearings for the coverage of the Trump assassination,
it was the
go ahead and
House Oversight Committee. It's the House
Oversight.
Yeah.
Sorry, not the Judicial Committee. The House Oversight Committee is fully available to see on YouTube, and it is a definite recommended watch by me. It was enlightening to see how much people like to keep it close to the vest. And if you want an insight on politics, that's your first start.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm thinking back to back to when President Obama was in office. There were incidents of lesser magnitude, I'll call it. There were like 2 or 3 weeks where someone managed to jump over the White House fence and onto the lawn. Didn't get to the building. Didn't get anywhere. They were detained or stopped before they even got there. But that was seen as a bad enough failing that the director of the Secret Service at that moment did resign. So there is a lot of there are a lot of people who are in government who are incensed by the failing of the Secret Service in this portrait, and it does fall on the person in charge. Now, you had also mentioned that, like we said, there's so many details about that situation that we'll not necessarily be able to get into right now, but a lot of those details seem to indicate that somewhere in the chain of command there was a critical failing and error that allowed the situation to happen. And that means where that needs to be found. That chain needs to be inspected to find where the weakest link was and fix it, reinforce it. And if you need to rebuild a new chain, then you need to rebuild a new chain. But you also have to think about, well, we still need, like we said, we still need people who are going to have enough wherewithal and insight to still lead through what is a political whirlwind of a presidential election year with 4 or 5 months to go.
I agree 100%. And to anybody watching, I just want to let you know, be vigilant of anything that comes across social media, whether it comes as a report that this or that has happened. Just make sure you double check your sources. It's the most important thing that we can all do right now. And whether or not it has already happened or it is happening, just make sure you're double checking that. I wanted to make sure we caught that before we get into our prospect section, where we get to turn to our individual analysis. So right now, with President Biden dropping out of the race, it seems that Kamala Harris will be the next Democrat nominee. However, we still have the Democrat National Convention coming up in August. Gerald, do you have any thoughts on how that's going to go, or do you think she will remain the Democrat frontrunner?
I think, in my personal opinion, I really do think she's going to stay the Democratic nominee. I think it's weird to say that over the last few days she solidified herself, but circumstances have solidified her position. I'll put it that way. Um, I feel like I said, if it was an open-ended question where the president just said, "I'm dropping out of the presidential race to whoever the next Democratic nominee is, I'll support them, and then do this, that, and the other." No, he went right out and said, "I'm endorsing the vice president. I'm endorsing the person who's been in office with me the last 4 years in the office next door." And there's a reasonable enough sense that someone who's been in that position is ready for the next step, and that next step just it happens to be the presidency. Whether you agree with that determination or not is your vote and your position. Personally, for me, I think with the historical precedents that exists in this country of vice presidents taking over for president in various circumstances, whether they be I reached the end of my term limit like Ronald Reagan did, and then George H.W. Bush took over and won the election the next year, or where a president was unable to finish their term, like Richard Nixon, and Vice President Ford took over, or even in the case with the assassination of John F. Kennedy, where Lyndon Baines Johnson took over and was sworn in as president on an emergency basis, and then also won his first election into that office, because he did win the next election with on the Democratic ticket as a leader. There is a lot of historical precedents for a vice president to be the next one up. And I think as much of a traditionalist as President Biden is, that seemed to be a no-brainer for him. This is someone who's been here, someone who understands what the vision is, someone who understands how this machine works internally. And instead of trying to find someone who might have questions about their abilities in this position, I'm going to pick the person who's been right next to me the whole time.
Yeah, and I agree with the pick. I mean, it seems almost a surefire thing of somebody's been next to you the entire time. You might as well give them the nod. And I will be fair and say Kamala Harris hasn't, jumped the buck one time this entire presidency. So she's easily the surefire go for the DNC, the Democratic National Convention, when it comes along. However, there were other opportunities that it seems people are thinking that they might take instead.
Yeah, there is always this under rumbling of noise that exists during any political election year, during any election year. Politics is funny that way; it just is. I remember for the first year and a half or 2 years of Joe Biden's presidency, but even when he was running for this term, there were a lot of people who thought he would have picked that he would have picked Michelle Obama as a vice presidential pick. Some people thought he might pick Pete Buttigieg and might actually thought they might have endorsed him, considering he's been so close to that administration and so involved in that administration for such a long time that they really thought, well, he had a really good run in the primaries, but he was given a really good position, a really solid position in the administration, and so he could have been someone who jumped into that position as well. But
well, and even on top of that, when we look at other people so much as Pete Buttigieg, we might start to look at who do we expect the expected Democrat frontrunner Kamala Harris, vice president, to select as her vice president. And Pete Buttigieg has been among names, although not very highly ranked. Gerald, do you have
that see? I
fun
think
table to look at?
Yeah, I'm going to pick up the one election betting odds. This is the most recent chart that they have. They have a lot of different charts, a lot of different stuff that you can look at. We always recommend that website by it's literally called electionbettingodds.com, created by John Stossel and a couple of other partners of his. And this shows currently the real time results. By the way, these do update every a minute to every 5 minutes on or about. So these are current results of the probability of different people being the presumptive vice presidential pick for Vice President Harris. Senator Mark Kelly, who ran a very invigorating race in Arizona to win that over, I forgot who it was he won it over. It was a Republican nominee, a Republican senator who took the spot of former Senator John McCain after he passed away. So it was technically an open seat during that election. But Mark Kelly seems to be leading right now. I think this is Senator Shapiro.
And then Blake Masters was who he had defeated in 2022.
Oh, he defeated Blake Masters. Okay. And also have Cooper, I think Andy Beshear, and then down at 2% and still technically falling is Pete Buttigieg, and almost catching up to him by 1 percentage point off is Mark Cuban. I don't think the Democrats are in this mode of pulling a Trump and pulling a celebrity just for the sake of getting votes.
Well, they were both on Celebrity Apprentice.
This is very true. This is very true. You know what? The Apprentice versus the Shark Tank.
Yeah. It's Fox trying to pull views.
That's what it is. But this is how it stands right now. I think it'd be interesting to see. I highly doubt. I don't think the Democratic Party would like a very much out there type of candidate. I think they want to think on the safer side of risk, if you know what I mean, for the vice president. But it's probably, in my opinion, it's probably going to be someone from outside the administration. I don't see Secretary of Transportation? He is Pete Buttigieg.
Yep.
Secretary of Transportation being picked for that spot. As much as I think it would technically make sense, I think they want to still say this is from within the administration, but also this is us bringing more of the Democratic Party in.
I agree. I
also do want to point out the fact that I don't see necessarily any hardline progressive candidates on this list anywhere for the most part.
Well, you have to think of what is the smartest for party alignment here. Is they're already taking a notch down by not selecting their incumbent. It's proven to be historically the easiest win you can get is by having an incumbent. However, right now we're in a different situation. So here, looking at it, it might be the move for them to select somebody outside of their current administration, as you said. Now, between Kelly and Shapiro I think those are the only two real chances. I don't like going against or going with the odds, but these are just a fair gauge of where money is being put towards this. So when we go ahead and look at the Veep nominee, we have 39.5% on Kelly, 22% on Shapiro. Significant drop off, but I implore you all to do your own research and find out why they might be better. I'm not here to tell you everything. I'm here to just give you the bare bones.
Right.
But what we have more interesting if we wouldn't mind switching gears a little bit, is Gerald, would you mind taking us over to the Senate map?
Yeah, just a moment.
Because there is more than one race going on this November. In case you are not aware of this, and 99% of you are, every time you step up to the ballot box, you get to vote for your state senator or House of Representatives member. This year, the Senate looks important because there's no reason for a president to even sit in office if they don't have their legislators backing them. So let's take a look here. Gerald, what do you think is going to come? A lot of people have prospected a red wave coming behind 45 running again. And others doubt that and think that we're going to follow the same trajectory as 2022.
I still think there's a lot to be understood, a lot to try to take in with that prospect of thinking of waves and everything. I think there is a lot of energy behind it. I'm all for more people voting within the guidelines of people who are able to vote. I'm not against having as many voices possible to be heard. That's the backbone of our process to pick our leadership and our government. In terms of the Senate, I think there's been so much attention on the presidential race right now that the Senate has fallen behind. And I implore people usually to pay more attention to the Senate because, like you said, a president's ability to get any amount of work done is going to be based on his ability or her ability to work with the legislative branch of our government, the House of Representatives and the Senate. The Senate being really kind of the final stepping point between when a proposed law, a proposed bill becomes a law. If it gets past the Senate, it's usually something that's going to get done or something that gets signed off by the president. It seems to be the process. Now, there is a way for the bills and laws to process the other way around, being introduced into Senate and then taken over to the House. That's not a very common way for that to happen either.
And it's not a very fun story to tell either.
That's true. But the Senate is still incredibly important. And we have had razor thin edges in the Senate for the last, I think, 5 elections, if I'm not mistaken. Because I am including the midterms. If you include the midterms, it's probably 7 elections. You got to remember, President Trump came into office on what we call a Republican trifecta. The Republicans controlled the House. The Republicans controlled the Senate. They maintained control in the Senate when they thought there was a chance for it to flip during that election of 2016. And the Republicans took the presidency, the office of the presidency. The Republican trifecta. Anything and everything that got done up to that point seemed to be streamlined because the party was in unilateral leadership control of passing the laws, passing the bills, getting the proposals in, and then getting everything done, signed off by the Republican president. Now, whatever disagreements happen within there and whatever chaos happens within is all part of politics, understandably, but still was a bit of a letdown for a Republican trifecta. My main gripe on that would have been the revamping of the American Health Act that I feel didn't really go anywhere. And as someone on a personal note who has had to deal with the frustration of first Obamacare being what it is and having to deal with that mess, and then also trying to rely on the American Healthcare Act, and that was also a mess. It's a give and take, obviously, like I always say, but that inefficiency caused for the next midterm election that happened in 2018 for it to it caused the start of the frustration for President Trump and his leadership in the office, I think. So very important consensus race. This is a consensus map real quick. I just want to show you what the idea is. Right now, they have the Republicans sitting at 50 and Democrats at 48 with two toss-ups, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, in Ohio and Montana, 50-50 races that they can't thoroughly or confidently predict. All of that to say, the Senate is going to be very important to pay attention to. Now, we pay attention to the Senate very closely because we think there's an opportunity. I know it's shading Maryland, and I think that's based on historical precedents. Maryland as a leaning blue state right now. Current polls do show that Maryland is somewhat leaning blue, but there's a very strong Republican candidate, one that we actually like, in former Governor Larry Hogan.
Lawrence Hogan.
Who is running on the Republican ticket in the state of Maryland, who we believe could tip the balance in the Senate. Because if it's 50-50, it goes to the office of the presidency because the vice president sits as the tiebreaker vote and leader of the Senate in the way that our government is structured. But if it's 51, then that means you get control of the Senate because simple majorities do pass laws in our Senate. Corey, your thoughts on just overall Larry Hogan real quick, and then also on his chances as a Senate candidate?
Sure. I worked very closely with Governor Hogan on a lot of Maryland House of Delegates bills to, unfortunately, at that time not get passed or get passed. There was a very large majority that tried to strike down anything that he wanted, which understandably fits the people. It's the people's democracy. I think many people liked him. I think he rubbed a couple shoulders wrong where it comes to the MAGA Republicans when he completely bucked former President Trump on major issues involving COVID and involving just states' dependence on the federal government. Now, what this comes down to is we have a potential senator who really knows how to manage things on the federal level. He never came to Maryland and played in Maryland to play small ball. He was always there to back up his people. I have never given my full just excitement to one candidate, but I will give it to Larry Hogan. I've seen him work across lines as much as he could, and I think it's an exciting prospect. The only thing that I'm worried about is any trifecta.
Yeah, any unilateral control of the possibility of disenfranchising an entire half of the country is a dangerous prospect. Okay? And it is what it is. In terms of what the Senate can get done, because I think as a general public, we can agree there's a lot of people who are tired of what we feel like the government sitting on their hands and not doing much. Failed bill after failed bill because they're either too far going one direction or in one end of an ideology or too far the other way, and being at a stalemate. Having seen what Governor Hogan did in the state of Maryland, which, by the way, is no Republican country. It is a very heavily Democratic population. But him being...
And speaking of, the current governor of Maryland just gave the supposed nominee for the Democratic Party the highest commendation, saying nobody is better for the job than Kamala Harris. But we have until August to. Wes Moore gave his support fully out to our current vice president.
Right. But in terms of, like I said, this is a very heavily Democratic state that does like its Democrats. We dealt with 2 consecutive terms of Martin O'Malley. And then after that, we had 2 consecutive terms of a Republican governor named Larry Hogan, who I think was effective in being this traditionalist type of politician where, like I said, the reality is consensus. And the consensus means there's going to be a trade-off somewhere. We'll get this done if you get that done. We'll get this in if you get that in. We'll take this out if you take that out. The reality is this country's at a standstill unless you're willing to make those types of deals to keep the country moving forward. And I think at the very least, if the country's moving forward and business is getting done with someone who knows how to not just be, oh, I'm a hardliner, I don't agree with your ideology, I don't even agree with some of the people in our own centrist part of the party. No, this is someone who's going to say, this country needs to get a move on. We need to get some work going. We need to make some deals here. And he seems like someone I can trust with enough wherewithal and wisdom to make those decisions. So I definitely think he's someone to keep an eye out, because I personally believe if Larry Hogan wins a seat in the Senate is going to be Republican. That's my personal opinion. I think there's enough going in other races and in other parts of the election across the country in different states where it leads to a 51-person majority for the Republicans. But nonetheless, the majority is what gets the job done. And if he's willing to be the one that says, well, let's make this work out, let's get this, that, and the other going, I think it should be something that would be beneficial to the country in general, whether you are a Republican or Democrat or otherwise. It would be good for the country to have someone who's there to get business done.
I agree. And I think if he's the, as you just said, if he's the 51st that comes in, or, I mean, I'd rather him be 50th. That way, if he hypothetically were to support a Republican bill, then he would agree on it, and it would go up to the White House to confirm, or it would go to the vice president, I should say. But otherwise, I think he's a fantastic candidate. I think he's shown his experience. He's, in my own shoes, he's a very likable guy. I've enjoyed every interaction I've had with him, and we're going to be looking forward to a very strange several years without him in Maryland if he wins this re-election.
Yeah, definitely interesting. Definitely something to keep an eye on. Full disclosure, I've worked for Maryland Board of Elections, PD Board of Elections before. I currently live in PG County, which is a very, even within Maryland, it's a very heavily Democratic area. But there are a lot of people that do like what Larry Hogan did while he was in charge of the state. They think he ran the state well. They think he did a good job being a leader for the entire state. And that's kind of what you want in any elected government official. You want someone who's going to say, yeah, I have the people that supported me to get in here, but I'm going to be a leader who gets things done for everyone's benefit. And, you know, that's really where you want an election to be based off of, or really want
Gerald,
election to be.
That's the only way that an opposition leader gets reelected.
All right.
Is by people liking what they have to put down. And when it comes down to Larry Hogan, I think he made enemies on both sides signing off of governorship. But I think we all realize that we're in an okay spot as it sits right now. So we're going to take a second and figure out what's going to come up next. Any closing thoughts, Gerald?
Politics never sleeps. There's always something going on. We have a lot to pay attention to in the days coming. Do not get tired or try to push past the over-sensationalize anything in politics right now. Everything seems to be a headline. Everything seems to be major breaking. You got to remember, keep your head on your shoulders. Do the research for yourself. Trust don't just trust what someone's telling you on the TV screen or on Twitter. There are resources available to everybody. There are voting records that you can look up on government records. There are histories and campaign platforms that you can read into, that you should read into if you're considering voting for one candidate or another. Local elections do matter. If it's county, if it's county executive, if it's mayor, if it's state delegate, state senator, state Supreme Court, a lot of times are elected officials, or appeals court are elected officials. Definitely look into those. But be the most informed voter you can be. Not so you can lord your knowledge over anyone else, but for your own benefit and for the benefit of those around you. You want to be someone who can aptly say in and of themselves, I did my research, I know exactly who I'm voting for, why I'm voting for them, and this is what I think is best for me, my family, my community, my state, my country moving forward. And that's why I'm going here, and here. So do your due diligence. If you're planning on voting, highly recommend that you do vote, and highly recommend that you do the research for who you vote for.
Yeah, and I mean, you stole the words out of my mouth. Is my first thing I was going to say was always double check, triple check your sources. There's a lot of false information going around, no matter what side you're looking at. I just saw one today on Twitter that Jimmy Carter was dead. Not true.
Right.
Very much alive as of this recording on July 23rd, 2024. But be wise, be vigilant, and form your own thoughts. There's every different way you can be raised, every different way your friends, your family, anybody can affect you. But think for your own and be vigilant about everything you hear. And stay safe. And on that note, I've been Corey.
And I've been Cheryl.
And thank you for tuning in to the We Talk podcast.
We'll see you again soon, guys.